They say justice is blind. But in Judge Vivian Langford's courtroom, justice saw only what it wanted to see, and it hated what it saw in Ronan Hale. She thought he was just another statistic, another man she could crush beneath her gavel to keep her conviction rates high and her ego fed. She mocked him, silenced him, and prepared to ruin his life, convinced she was untouchable. But Vivian made a fatal mistake. She didn't check who Ronan really was. She wasn't sentencing a criminal. She was humiliating the assistant director of the FBI's public corruption unit, and he was wearing a wire. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B was always set to a frigid temperature, a chill that Judge Vivian Langford insisted kept the riffraff alert and the lawyers concise. In the legal circles of Charleston, South Carolina, 4B was known as the icebox, not just for the cold, but for the woman who sat upon the mahogany bench. Vivian Langford was in her early 60s, with hair sprayed into a helmet of aggressive blonde and eyes that could spot a smudge on a bailiff's uniform from across the room. She didn't preside over her courtroom. She ruled it. For decades, she had built a reputation as the toughest judge in the county. To the wealthy country club set, she was a pillar of law and order, a woman who kept the streets clean. To the public defenders and the minority communities of the district, she was a tyrant in a polyester robe, a woman who handed out maximum sentences for misdemeanors and sneered at rehabilitation. On this humid morning, the docket was full. Vivian flipped through the files with a manicured hand, her lip curling in distaste. It was the usual parade: petty thefts, traffic violations, drunk and disorderly. She was bored. She wanted something she could sink her teeth into, someone she could make an example of. "Next case," she barked, not bothering to look up. "The state versus Ronan Hale." The bailiff, a heavy-set man named Derek Langford, who had long ago learned never to make eye contact with Vivian before noon, announced docket number 4492. Charges: resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and failure to comply with a lawful order. Vivian paused. She looked at the name on the file. Hale. It sounded pretentious. She looked up, expecting to see a sagging demeanor. Perhaps a nervous young man in a borrowed suit that didn't fit, or a defiant thug in a jumpsuit. Instead, the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a quiet, confident weight. Ronan Hale walked in. He was a tall man, easily 6'3", with skin the color of deep mahogany and a build that suggested he spent his mornings in a boxing gym. But it wasn't his size that made the courtroom go quiet. It was his attire. He wore a charcoal three-piece bespoke suit that probably cost more than Officer Langford's car. His tie was a muted silk crimson tied in a perfect Windsor knot. He carried no briefcase, only a single slim leather folder. He walked down the center aisle with a stride that was neither hurried nor arrogant. It was the walk of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. Vivian felt a prickle of irritation instantly. She hated when they dressed up. She felt it was a disguise, a costume designed to trick her into leniency. She preferred them to look guilty. It made her job easier. "Mr. Hale," Vivian said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet southern drawl that concealed venom. "You're late." Ronan stopped at the defense table. He checked his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe, though Vivian wouldn't have recognized it. "Your Honor, the docket states my hearing is set for this morning. It is currently on time." Vivian narrowed her eyes. "In my courtroom, arriving at the last minute is late. If you aren't seated and waiting for me, you are wasting the court's time." "My apologies, Your Honor," Ronan said, though his face remained impassive. "I was detained by security at the entrance. They seemed quite thorough today." "Security is there to keep us safe, Mr. Hale," Vivian snapped. "Something I'm sure you have trouble appreciating." A ripple of nervous energy went through the gallery. The court reporter, a young woman named Mira Jenkins, who was terrified of Vivian, typed furiously. "Where is your counsel?" Vivian demanded, looking around. "Don't tell me you're representing yourself. I have a very low tolerance for amateur theatrics." "My attorney has been delayed due to a flight cancellation," Ronan said smoothly. "However, for the purpose of this arraignment, I am prepared to proceed pro se." Vivian smiled. It was a shark's smile, pro se, representing himself. It was the classic mistake of the arrogant. She loved it when they represented themselves. It gave her carte blanche to tear them apart on procedural grounds. "Very well," she said, leaning back in her leather chair, which groaned under the shift. "Step forward, Mr. Hale. Let's see what kind of trouble you've managed to get yourself into." The prosecutor, District Attorney Preston Vale, stood up. Preston was a weaselly man with thinning hair and a desperate need for Vivian's approval. He was up for re-election next year, and he needed her endorsement. "Your Honor," Preston began, hitching up his pants, "the state is prepared to show that the defendant, Mr. Hale, was aggressive toward law enforcement officers during a traffic stop on the interstate. When asked to exit the vehicle, he refused. When asked for identification, he was combative. He displayed a complete lack of respect for authority." Vivian shook her head, making a show of looking disappointed. "Typical," she muttered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Absolutely typical." She looked down at Ronan, who was standing perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't look like a man facing jail time. He looked like he was observing a play he found mildly boring. "Well, Mr. Hale," Vivian prodded, "do you have anything to say for yourself, or are you just going to stand there in your fancy suit and pretend you're above the law?" "I would like to enter a plea of not guilty, Your Honor," Ronan said, "and I would like to request that the dashcam footage from the arresting officer's vehicle be admitted into evidence immediately." Vivian laughed. It was a dry, hacking sound. "You don't make demands in my court, boy. You make requests, and right now, I'm not in a giving mood." The use of the word boy hung in the air like a noxious gas. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Ronan's jaw tightened, the only sign of emotion he had shown so far. "Is there a problem with the term boy, Mr. Hale?" Vivian challenged, daring him to react. She wanted him to get angry. She wanted the angry black man narrative to play out so she could hold him in contempt. "No, Your Honor," Ronan replied, his voice terrifyingly even. "I am simply taking notes." "Notes?" Vivian scoffed. "You'd better be taking notes on how to beg for mercy. Bail is set at $50,000. The gallery gasped. For disorderly conduct and resisting arrest, $50,000 was unheard of. It was unconstitutional. It was purely punitive. "Your Honor," Ronan said, "that amount is excessive for the charges filed. I have no criminal record. I am not a flight risk." "I decide who is a flight risk." Vivian slammed her gavel down, the crack echoing like a gunshot. "You have no ties to this community. You drive a car with out-of-state plates. You have an attitude problem, 50,000 cash, or you sit in county until trial." She glared at him, waiting for the outburst, waiting for the plea of poverty. Instead, Ronan Hale reached into his inner suit pocket. Bailiff Langford tensed, his hand dropping to his taser. Ronan pulled out a checkbook. "Will the court accept a cashier's check, or should I have my bank wire the funds to the clerk immediately?" Vivian stared at him. She felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck. He wasn't scared. He wasn't humiliated. He was inconveniencing her with his competence. "Remand him," she hissed to the bailiff. "Process the paperwork slowly. Let him sit in the holding cell for a few hours. Let's see how that suit looks after a few hours on a metal bench." As Bailiff Langford moved to handcuff him, Ronan turned. He looked Vivian dead in the eye. For a second, Vivian felt a strange sensation in her gut, a primal warning she hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of a predator realizing it had stalked a larger predator. "Make sure the record reflects the bail amount, Your Honor," Ronan said softly, and the terminology used. "Get him out of here," Vivian shrieked. As the heavy doors closed behind Ronan Hale, Vivian adjusted her robe, her heart rate slightly elevated. She told herself it was just anger. She told herself he was just another arrogant thug with drug money. She had no idea that the thug had just transmitted the audio recording of the last minutes to a secure server in Quantico, Virginia. The holding cell in the basement of the courthouse smelled of bleach, urine, and old despair. It was designed to break people. The neon lights buzzed incessantly, and the benches were bolted to the floor, too narrow to lie on. Ronan Hale sat in the corner, his back straight, his suit jacket folded neatly on his lap to avoid the grime of the bench. He wasn't looking at the graffiti scrawled on the cinderblock walls. He was replaying the interaction in his mind. Judge Vivian Langford. The file the FBI had on her was 3 inches thick. For a decade, the Bureau had received complaints, civil rights violations, kickbacks from private juvenile detention centers, sentencing disparities that were statistically impossible to attribute to chance. But she was slippery. She knew how to walk the line between strict interpretation of the law and judicial misconduct. She had powerful friends, senators, a governor, the local police union. She was protected. To take her down, they couldn't just audit her. They had to catch her in the act of gross negligence and undeniable bias. They needed her to abuse her power against someone she thought she could bully. They needed bait. Ronan had volunteered. He wasn't just an agent. He was the assistant director of the Public Corruption Division. He had grown up in a neighborhood not unlike the ones Vivian Langford terrorized. He had seen judges like her before, people who used the gavel as a bludgeon. This was personal. The door to the holding cell clanged open. Bailiff Langford stood there looking less aggressive than he had in the courtroom. He held a clipboard. "Your lawyer is here," Langford grunted, "and the wire transfer went through. You're free to go pending trial." Langford looked at Ronan with a mix of confusion and suspicion. He had seen drug dealers post bail, but not like this. This guy didn't have the jittery energy of a criminal. He had the stillness of a statue. Ronan stood up, put on his jacket, and buttoned it. "Thank you, officer." He walked out into the hallway where a man was waiting for him. It wasn't the delayed lawyer from D.C. It was Nolan Whitaker, a top-tier civil rights attorney who was actually an undercover asset for the Bureau. Nolan looked the part. Disheveled hair, a slightly fraying suit, looking overworked and overwhelmed. This was part of the play. They needed Vivian to think Ronan's defense was weak. "Mr. Hale," Nolan said loudly, playing to the cameras in the hallway, "I'm so sorry about the delay. I'll try to get this sorted." "Just get me out of here," Ronan said, playing his role of the frustrated, wealthy defendant. They walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding South Carolina sun. They didn't speak until they were inside Ronan's car, a black SUV with tinted windows that swept the interior for bugs every 30 seconds. "Did you get it?" Nolan asked, his demeanor instantly shifting from frantic lawyer to sharp professional. Ronan tapped the slim pen in his pocket. Every word, the excessive bail, the refusal to hear motions. It's a start, but it's not enough for a federal indictment yet. We need her to go further. We need her to violate my constitutional rights in a way that is indisputable. We need her to rig the trial. "She will," Nolan said, starting the engine. "I looked at the docket. She moved your trial date up. She wants this done soon. She hates you, Ronan. You bruised her ego." "Good," Ronan said, staring out the window at the courthouse receding in the rearview mirror. "An angry enemy makes mistakes." The preliminary hearing was set. Vivian had expedited it, claiming judicial efficiency, but everyone knew she just wanted to crush the man in the expensive suit. When Ronan and Nolan entered the courtroom, the atmosphere was different. Vivian wasn't bored today. She was energized. She had done her research, or what she considered research. She had probably called the local sheriff, asked around about Ronan Hale. Finding nothing because his cover identity was watertight, she likely assumed he was a nobody with new money. Perhaps a lottery winner or a low-level hustler trying to act big. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Vivian swept in, her eyes locking onto Ronan immediately. "Mr. Hale," she said, smiling, "I see you found some counsel. Mr. Whitaker, is it?" She looked at Nolan's rumpled suit with disdain. "I hope you're prepared. I don't tolerate incompetence." "We are prepared to move for a dismissal, Your Honor," Nolan said, his voice shaking slightly. "A perfect affectation. The police report contradicts the dashcam footage." "Motion denied," Vivian said before he even finished the sentence. Nolan blinked. "Your Honor, you haven't even seen the footage." "I have reviewed the officer's sworn affidavit," Vivian said, waving a hand dismissively. "Officer Langford is a decorated veteran of the force. His word is sufficient for this court to proceed to trial. The dashcam footage can be introduced at trial if you feel it's relevant, but I am not going to waste this court's time with frivolous motions to dismiss based on technicalities. Evidence is not a technicality, Your Honor. Ronan spoke up from the table. Silence, Vivian roared. You speak through your attorney or not at all. One more outburst, Mr. Hale, and I will revoke your bail and throw you back in that cell until trial. Do you understand me? I understand that you are denying my right to due process, Ronan said calmly. Vivian's face turned a shade of crimson that matched Ronan's tie from the previous day. Mr. Vale, she barked at the prosecutor, add contempt of court to the list of charges. So noted, Your Honor, Preston Vale smirked. And Mr. Hale? Vivian leaned over the bench, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. I'm going to teach you a lesson about respect. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you had never driven through my town. I'm going to make sure you serve maximum time. Consecutive sentences. You're looking at 5 years, boy. 5 years for a traffic stop? For your attitude, Vivian corrected. For thinking you're better than the law. My law. Your law, Ronan repeated. Interesting choice of words. Trial is set for Friday, Vivian announced. No continuances, no delays. Be here or I issue a warrant. Get out of my sight. As they walked out, Nolan whispered to Ronan, She just threatened a predetermined sentence before the trial has even begun. That's judicial misconduct, plain and simple. It's getting there, Ronan said, his eyes cold. But I want the kill shot. I want her to solicit something, or I want her to destroy evidence. How do we get her to do that? Ronan adjusted his cuffs. We make her think I have something she needs, or we make her think I have something that can destroy her, and see what she tries to do to bury it. That night, a clerk, an FBI forensic accountant, accidentally left a file folder on the prosecutor's desk marked Hale Financials, Offshore Accounts. It was bait. The file contained fabricated documents showing that Ronan wasn't just wealthy. He was holding millions in undocumented funds. It implied he was a money launderer. Ronan knew that Preston Vale would run to Judge Langford with this info, and he knew Langford, greedy and arrogant, wouldn't report it to the IRS. She would try to use it. She would see Ronan as a piñata waiting to be busted open. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait for the judge to walk into it. The bait had been taken. Preston Vale, the sweaty and ambitious district attorney, had found the planted file on Ronan Hale's offshore accounts. It was a masterpiece of forgery created by the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Bank statements from the Cayman Islands, shell company registrations in Panama, and wire transfers suggesting Ronan was moving millions of dollars a month. To a greedy man, it didn't look like evidence of a crime to be prosecuted. It looked like a piñata waiting to be struck. Preston didn't file the evidence. He didn't call the IRS. He did exactly what Ronan predicted. He ran straight to Judge Vivian Langford. It was early morning on the day of the trial. The courthouse was buzzing, but the real action was happening behind the heavy oak door of the judge's chambers. You're certain about these numbers? Vivian asked, her eyes scanning the fake documents. She licked her thumb to turn the page, her greed practically vibrating in the air. It's all there, Vivian, Preston whispered, too excited to maintain professional decorum. This guy isn't just a thug with an attitude. He's a whale. He's moving serious weight. If we lock him up on the resisting charges, the feds will eventually swoop in for the money. But if we handle this locally? Vivian sat back, tapping a manicured fingernail against her lip. Asset forfeiture, she mused. Under state law, if we can prove the vehicle and the cash on his person were used in the commission of a crime, even a traffic crime, we can seize assets related to that criminal enterprise. Exactly, Preston nodded. But we need him to plead. If he goes to trial and gets acquitted, he walks with the money. If we scare him enough, maybe he cuts a check to the county to make the charges go away. A civil compromise. Vivian smiled. It was a cold, calculating expression. In her county, civil compromises often involved donations to charities where her nephew sat on the board, or funds that mysteriously evaporated into administrative costs for the court. Bring his lawyer in, Vivian commanded. Not Hale, just the lawyer. Let's see if Mr. Whitaker understands how things work in the South. 10 minutes later, Nolan Whitaker stood in the judge's chambers. He looked nervous, clutching his briefcase with white knuckles. In reality, the briefcase contained a high-fidelity transmitter broadcasting directly to Ronan, who was sitting in a surveillance van 2 blocks away, listening to every word. "Mr. Whitaker," Vivian began, her voice falsely warm. She gestured to a chair. "Please sit. We have a heavy day ahead, and I wanted to see if we could resolve this misunderstanding before we waste the jury's time." "I'm listening, Your Honor," Nolan said, his voice shaky. "Mr. Vale here has come into possession of some troubling financial information regarding your client," Vivian said, sliding a single sheet of the fake bank statement across her desk. "Now, I don't want to ruin a young man's life over a traffic stop, but I also can't have criminals running loose in my county." Nolan looked at the paper and feigned panic. "Where did you get this? This is privileged." "It doesn't matter where we got it," Preston interrupted. "What matters is what we do with it." Vivian leaned forward. "Here is the offer, Mr. Whitaker, and this is a one-time courtesy. Your client pleads no contest to the disorderly conduct charge. He accepts a sentence of time served and probation." "That sounds reasonable," Nolan said cautiously. "There is a condition," Vivian added, her eyes narrowing. "As part of his probation, and to show his commitment to the community he disrespected, Mr. Hale will make a voluntary restitution payment of $250,000 to the Charleston Law Enforcement Benevolence Fund." There it was, the shakedown. The Benevolence Fund was notorious. It was Vivian's piggy bank, used to fund police balls, re-election campaigns, and consulting fees for her friends. $250,000, Nolan choked out. "Your Honor, that's extortion." "That," Vivian said, her voice dropping to a growl, "is justice. It's the price of doing business. If he refuses, I will proceed to trial immediately. I will deny every motion you file. I will allow Mr. Vale to introduce this financial information as evidence of flight risk and criminal character. I will sentence him to 5 years, consecutive, not concurrent. And while he rots in a cell, I will initiate civil seizure proceedings on every account he has. He will lose the money anyway, Mr. Whitaker. This way, he keeps his freedom." She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Do we have a deal?" Nolan hesitated, looking from Preston to Vivian. I have to ask my client." "You have 10 minutes, Vivian said, checking her watch. "If you aren't back in this room with a check or a wire transfer confirmation by 8:30, the deal is off, and tell Mr. Hale to wipe that smug look off his face. I own him now." Nolan stood up, nodded meekly, and left the room. As the door closed, Vivian chuckled. Too easy. These new money types always pay. 2 blocks away, in the back of the black surveillance van, Ronan Hale took off his headset. His expression was grim. "Did we get it?" asked Special Agent Derek Langford, who was manning the audio console. "Crystal clear," Ronan said. "Solicitation of a bribe, extortion, conspiracy. That's 20 years right there." "Do we move in now?" Langford asked, hand hovering over the radio to signal the SWAT team on standby. "No," Ronan said, standing up and straightening his tie. "Not yet. She wants a trial. Let's give her a trial. I want her to do it on the record. I want her to destroy the evidence of my innocence in open court. We nailed the coffin shut today." He opened the van door. "Let's go to court." Courtroom 4B was packed. Word had spread that Judge Langford was going to crucify the rich out-of-towner, and the locals treated it like a spectator sport. When Ronan walked in, the atmosphere was hostile. The gallery whispered and pointed. Judge Langford sat on the bench, looking impatient and annoyed. She had done her research, or what she considered research. She had probably called the local sheriff, asked around about Ronan Hale. Finding nothing because his cover identity was watertight, she likely assumed he was a nobody with new money. Perhaps a lottery winner or a low-level hustler trying to act big. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. "Be seated," Vivian snapped. She glared at the defense table. "Case number 4492, State v. Hale. The defendant has refused a generous plea offer, so we are proceeding to trial. Mr. Vale, call your first witness. The state calls Officer Langford, Preston Vale announced. Officer Langford lumbered to the stand, swearing to tell the truth. For the next minutes, prompted by Preston's leading questions, he spun a tale of fiction. He claimed Ronan had been swerving, that he smelled alcohol despite no breathalyzer evidence, that Ronan had lunged at him, screaming profanities. He was a threat to my safety and the safety of the public, Langford lied, looking earnestly at the jury. Thank you, officer, Preston said. Your witness. Nolan Whitaker stood up. Officer Langford, you stated my client was swerving and aggressive, yet your cruiser is equipped with a dashboard camera, is it not? Objection, Preston shouted. Relevance. Sustained, Vivian said instantly. Nolan paused, feigning shock. Your Honor, the video is the only objective evidence of the encounter. It goes to the very heart of the case. The officer's testimony is evidence, Vivian ruled, her voice sharp. We don't need to turn this into a movie theater. The camera angle was likely obstructed anyway. Move on, Mr. Whitaker. But, Your Honor, I have the footage right here, Nolan said, holding up a USB drive. The defense obtained it through a subpoena. It shows clearly that Mr. Hale was compliant and that Officer Langford... I said move on. Vivian slammed her gavel. I am ruling that footage inadmissible. It was not properly authenticated before this hearing. It's a police record, Nolan protested. Mr. Whitaker, one more word, and I will hold you in contempt, Vivian screamed. Her face was red. She was breaking every procedural rule in the book, confident that no appeals court would care about a simple disorderly conduct case. She wanted to humiliate them. Ronan leaned over to Nolan. She just suppressed exculpatory evidence. That's the final nail. Nolan nodded. He turned back to the judge. We have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor. Good, Vivian sneered. Does the defense have any witnesses? Yes, Your Honor, Nolan said. He looked back at the gallery. The defense calls Mr. Ronan Hale to the stand. A murmur went through the crowd. It was rare for defendants to testify. Vivian smiled. This was her chance. She would cross-examine him herself. If Preston didn't do a good enough job, she would tear him apart. Ronan walked to the stand. He didn't look at the Bible as he was sworn in. He looked directly at Vivian. Mr. Hale, Nolan asked, can you tell the court what happened on the morning in question? Certainly, Ronan said. His voice filled the room, calm and authoritative. I was driving north on the interstate, maintaining the speed limit. I was pulled over without cause. I was insulted, threatened, and arrested because I refused to be intimidated. Liar! Preston Reed shouted. Objection, Your Honor. He's characterizing the officer. Sustained, Vivian said. Mr. Hale, watch your tone. You are here to answer questions, not give speeches. I am here to tell the truth, Ronan said coolly. Something this court seems to have very little interest in. The gallery gasped. Vivian's eyes bulged. You listen to me, boy, she hissed, leaning over the bench, forgetting the microphone was on. You are in my house. You are a guest in my county, and you are about to find out what happens when you disrespect your betters. My betters? Ronan asked. Is that how you see yourself, Vivian? Better than the law? I am the law, she shouted. No, Ronan said, standing up in the witness box. You're not. He reached into his pocket. The bailiff Langford reached for his gun. Don't move, Langford shouted. Ronan didn't pull a weapon. He pulled out a gold badge. It wasn't a local sheriff's badge. It was the heavy, distinct shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Ronan Hale, Assistant Director FBI, he announced, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Judge Vivian Langford, you are under arrest. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum of shock. Vivian froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the badge. Then she looked at Preston Vale, who had turned a ghostly shade of white. What? What is this? Vivian stammered. This is a courtroom. You can't... This is a crime scene, Ronan corrected, and I have just secured the evidence. Suddenly, the doors to the courtroom burst open, but it wasn't the public. 6 agents in FBI windbreakers, armed and wearing tactical vests, flooded the room. "Federal agents, nobody move!" They didn't go for Ronan. 2 of them moved toward the prosecutor's table, cuffing Preston Vale before he could even stand up. 2 others moved toward the bailiff, disarming him efficiently. And 2 agents, led by a stern woman with a warrant in her hand, walked up the steps to the bench. Vivian Langford sat paralyzed on her throne. The power she had wielded for decades evaporated in a second. "Vivian Langford," the agent said, "I have a federal warrant for your arrest. Charges include racketeering, extortion, deprivation of rights under color of law, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." "This is a mistake," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm a judge. You can't do this." Ronan stepped down from the witness stand. He walked over to the bench, looking up at her, not as a defendant, but as the man who had brought her down. "You were a judge," Ronan said. "Now you're just a defendant, and unlike you, I'll make sure you get a fair trial." He looked at the agents. "Get her out of here." The image of Judge Vivian Langford being handcuffed in her own robes, dragged down from the bench while the gallery erupted into chaos, was a picture that would be on the front page of every newspaper in the country by morning. But the story wasn't over. The karma was just beginning. The interrogation room at the FBI field office in Columbia was nothing like the holding cell Vivian Langford used to torture her defendants. It was sterile, modern, and terrifyingly silent. Vivian sat at the metal table, stripped of her robe. Without the heavy polyester garment and the elevated bench, she looked small, frail even, but her eyes still held that flicker of delusional authority. She was handcuffed to the table. Across from her sat Ronan Hale. He had changed out of his bespoke suit into his standard FBI windbreaker. The visual transformation was jarring for her. The thug was gone. In his place was a high-ranking federal official who held her life in his hands. "You trapped me?" Vivian spat, her voice raspy. "Entrapment. That's what this is? My lawyer will have this thrown out before the ink dries." Ronan didn't get angry. He simply pressed a button on the laptop in front of him. Audio played. "I decide who is a flight risk. 50,000 cash. You're looking at 5 years, boy." He pressed another key. Audio played. "If he refuses, I will proceed to trial immediately. I will sentence him to 5 years. This way, he keeps his freedom. 250,000. The recording of the extortion attempt in her chambers filled the room. Vivian went pale. That was a negotiation," she stammered. "No, Vivian," Ronan said softly. "That was a federal felony, and it's just the tip of the iceberg." He slid a file across the table. It wasn't the fake financial records she had drooled over earlier. This was real. "We didn't just record you today," Ronan explained. "We've been auditing your benevolence fund for months. We traced the wire transfers. We know about the kickbacks from the private prison illegally detaining juveniles. We know about the vacation home in Aruba, paid for by the construction company that built the new courthouse. We have Preston Vale in the next room, and he is singing like a canary to cut a deal." Vivian flinched. Preston was weak. She knew he would turn on her. "You're done, Vivian," Ronan said, leaning in. "But here's the twist you didn't see coming. We aren't just charging you. We are reopening every single case you have presided over in the last decade, where a minority defendant was sentenced to maximum time for a nonviolent offense." Vivian's mouth fell open. That's thousands of cases. The system will collapse." "No," Ronan corrected. "The corruption will collapse. You built a kingdom on the suffering of people who couldn't fight back. You thought because they were poor or black or uneducated that they didn't matter. You forgot that the law protects them too. And you forgot that sometimes the man you try to crush is the one man who can crush you." Vivian slumped in her chair. The fight went out of her. She looked at the one-way mirror, realizing her reflection was no longer that of a judge, but of a criminal. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you do it yourself? You're a director. You could have sent agents." Ronan stood up, collecting his files. "Because I needed to see it. I needed to look you in the eye when you realized that your power was an illusion, and frankly, Vivian, I wanted to see you in cuffs." He walked to the door. "Enjoy federal custody. I hear the air conditioning is very cold." The trial of United States versus Vivian Langford didn't take place in her beloved icebox. It was held in a federal district court in Atlanta, far away from the local jury pool she had manipulated for years. The media coverage was relentless. The racist judge story had gone global. Every day, news crews filmed her walking into the courthouse, no longer the predator, but the prey. She looked haggard. The blonde helmet of hair was deflated. She wore a simple gray suit, not a robe. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Ronan Hale took the stand again, but this time, there was no pretense. He laid out the operation with clinical precision. The jury listened, captivated, as he described the sting, how she had mocked him, called him boy, and then tried to sell him his freedom for $250,000. But the most damning moment came when the prosecution played the dashcam footage, the footage Vivian had suppressed. On the large screens in the courtroom, the jury saw the truth. They saw Ronan's car driving perfectly straight. They saw Officer Langford, who had already pleaded guilty and resigned, scream at a calm, compliant Ronan. They saw the lie exposed in high definition. Vivian refused to testify. She sat at the defense table, staring at her hands as witness after witness, former defendants, court clerks, even her own secretary, took the stand to detail her tyranny. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was packed. Ronan sat in the back row watching. "We, the jury," the foreman announced, "find the defendant, Vivian Langford, guilty on all 32 counts of racketeering, corruption, and civil rights violations." Vivian closed her eyes. A single tear leaked out, not of remorse, but of self-pity. The federal judge, a stern man named Judge Patterson, who had zero tolerance for judicial misconduct, wasted no time with sentencing. "Vivian Langford," Judge Patterson said, his voice booming, "you were entrusted with the sacred duty of upholding the law. Instead, you used it as a weapon to enrich yourself and destroy lives. You are a disgrace to the bench and a stain on the American judicial system." He adjusted his glasses. "Because you were a judge, your betrayal is all the more heinous. I am sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison. You will not be eligible for parole. You will forfeit all assets, pensions, and properties acquired through your criminal enterprise." The gavel came down. It was a heavier final sound than any gavel Vivian had ever banged. 25 years. At 62, it was a life sentence. As the marshals moved to take her away, Vivian looked back. Her eyes scanned the crowd until they found Ronan. She looked for a moment of gloating, a smirk, something. But Ronan just watched her, his face impassive. He gave her a small, curt nod. It was the nod of a job finished. She was led away in chains, the metal clinking echoing the sounds of the thousands of men and women she had wrongfully imprisoned. The air in Charleston had changed. It wasn't just the turn of the season, shifting from the suffocating humidity of late summer to the crisp bite of autumn. It was a fundamental shift in the atmosphere of the city itself. The heavy, oppressive cloud that had hung over the county courthouse for decades, the cloud of Judge Vivian Langford, had finally dissipated. Months had passed since the verdict, months since the icebox had been thawed out by the scorching light of federal scrutiny. Ronan Hale sat in a rental car parked across the street from the courthouse. He hadn't planned on coming back. His work was usually done the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. He was a creature of the hunt, driven by the chase and the takedown. The aftermath, the paperwork, the restructuring, the healing, was usually left to others. But this case was different. It had gotten under his skin in a way few others had. Perhaps it was the way she had looked at him with that utter, unshakable certainty that he was beneath her. Or perhaps it was the stories he had heard during the investigation. Stories of families destroyed not by crime, but by the very person paid to arbitrate it. He needed to see the end of the chapter. He stepped out of the car. He wasn't wearing the three-piece bespoke suit of the wealthy defendant or the tactical windbreaker of the FBI director. Today, he wore a simple navy blazer and jeans. He wasn't here to arrest anyone. He was here as a witness. The courthouse square was bustling. It was a Saturday, and the town had organized a Justice Day rally. It was a reclaiming of the space. For years, the steps of the courthouse had been a place of dread, where mothers wept for their sons and lawyers smoked nervously, knowing the fix was in. Today, there were food trucks. There was music, a local jazz band playing something upbeat and brassy. There were children running around the fountain. It was surreal. Ronan walked through the crowd, unrecognized. That was the beauty of his job. When the raid was over, he faded back into the background. He liked it that way. He made his way toward the entrance of the building. The heavy oak doors, which had once seemed like the gates to a dungeon, were propped open. A banner hung above them. Equal justice under law. It looked fresh, the colors bright against the weathered stone. Inside, the lobby was undergoing a renovation. The portrait of Vivian Langford, which had dominated the main wall for years, a painting that depicted her looking regal and severe, clutching a law book like a weapon, was gone. In its place was a blank rectangle of slightly lighter paint, a scar that hadn't quite healed. A ladder stood nearby, and a painter was prepping the wall for something new. "Excuse me," a voice called out. Ronan turned. Walking toward him was Mira Jenkins. Months ago, she had been the terrified court reporter, typing quietly while Vivian abused her power, too afraid to lose her job and her pension to speak up. Now she looked like a different person. She was dressed in a sharp pantsuit, holding a stack of files, walking with a purpose. She had been appointed as the interim court administrator, tasked with the monumental job of auditing the thousands of cases Vivian had tainted. She stopped, her eyes widening as she recognized him. "Director Hale," she gasped. I didn't know you were coming." "Just Ronan today," he smiled, extending a hand. "And I'm just passing through. I wanted to see how the cleanup was going." Mira took his hand, her grip firm. It's a lot," she admitted, letting out a breath that was half exhaustion, half relief. "We're still finding things. Files hidden in ceiling tiles. Cash stashed in evidence lockers that don't exist on the blueprints. She didn't just bend the rules, Ronan. She shredded them." "I saw the news about the exonerations," Ronan said. "You've released 40 people so far." 42, Mira corrected, a beam of pride breaking through. 42 men and women who were sitting in state penitentiaries because Vivian didn't like their tone or their lawyer or the color of their skin. We have another 100 cases under review. It's going to take years to fix this. "But you're fixing it," Ronan said. "That's what matters." "We are," she nodded. Then her expression turned serious. "You know, she wrote a letter." Ronan raised an eyebrow. "Langford, to the court," Mira said. "From prison. It arrived yesterday." "Let me guess," Ronan said dryly. "She's the victim. It's a conspiracy. She's a political prisoner." Mira gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Almost word for word. She threatened to sue the county, the state, and you personally. She signed it, the Honorable Judge Langford." "Old habits die hard," Ronan said. "She still thinks the robe protects her." "Does it ever stop?" Mira asked, looking at the empty spot on the wall where the portrait used to be. "The ego, the entitlement?" "Eventually," Ronan said. "Prison has a way of grinding it down. It takes time, but right now she's in a 6x8 cell in West Virginia. She has to make her bed. She has to wait in line for food. She has to listen to guards tell her what to do. For a woman who treated people like furniture for decades, being treated like a number is the worst punishment imaginable. She's not living in a prison, Mira. She's living in a mirror. She's finally seeing what she did to everyone else." Mira nodded slowly. "I suppose you're right." She looked at her watch. "I have to go. We have a hearing for the vacate motions in 10 minutes. Judge Patterson is presiding remotely." "Go," Ronan said. "Do the work." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming here. for not just filing a report and leaving. You saved this town." "The town saved itself," Ronan said. "I just took out the trash." He watched her walk into courtroom 4B. He didn't follow her. He didn't need to see the inside of that room again. He knew what was happening there now. Apologies, releases, justice. Ronan walked back out into the sunlight. He found a bench near the fountain and sat down. He needed a moment before the long drive back to D.C. He pulled out his phone. He had a voicemail from Nolan Whitaker. Nolan had gone back to his high-profile civil rights practice in Atlanta, but he checked in on Ronan every week. "Hey, Ronan, just wanted to let you know the Bar Association just officially disbarred her permanently, and the state legislature just passed the Langford Act, mandatory audits for any judge with a sentencing disparity of more than 15%. It's happening, man. Real change. Hope you're taking a victory lap." Ronan deleted the message. He didn't believe in victory laps. There was always another Langford out there, another judge, another sheriff, another mayor who thought their badge was a crown. As he sat there, a man sat down on the other end of the bench. He was older, African-American, with gray hair and hands that looked like they had worked hard labor for decades. He was holding a melting ice cream cone for a little girl, maybe his granddaughter, who was playing near the water. The man looked at Ronan. "Nice day for it," he said. "It is," Ronan agreed. "You from around here?" the man asked. "No," Ronan said, "just visiting." The man nodded. He looked at the courthouse. "Used to be I wouldn't walk on this side of the street," he said, his voice casual but holding a weight of history. "Not on a Saturday, not ever. If you saw a cop car, you turned around. If you had business in that building, you made sure your affairs were in order." Ronan listened. He knew this man had no idea who he was. To this man, Ronan was just a stranger in a blazer. "Bad times," the man continued. "That woman, she was the devil. My nephew Andre, he got pulled over for a broken taillight in 18. She gave him 3 years. Said he looked like trouble. 3 years. He missed his daughter's first steps. Missed his mama's funeral." Ronan felt a tightness in his chest. This was the reality of the files he read. The files were just paper. This was the flesh and blood cost. "He out now?" Ronan asked. "He got out last week," the man smiled. A smile that lit up his face. "One of the first ones they let go. The new DA, she apologized to him. Can you imagine that? A prosecutor apologizing to a black man in this county. I thought I'd never see the day." The little girl ran back over, giggling, her face sticky with cotton candy. "Grandpa, push me on the swings." All right, baby girl," the man laughed. He stood up, groaning slightly with the effort. He looked down at Ronan. "Things are changing, brother. Slowly, but they're changing. You have a blessed day." "You too," Ronan said. He watched the man walk away, holding his granddaughter's hand. That was the conclusion. Not the verdict. Not the sentencing. Not the news report. That was the ending. A grandfather walking on a side of the street he used to fear. A father home with his daughter. Ronan stood up. He felt lighter. The anger that fueled him, the cold, hard rage that made him such a good hunter, had cooled into something quieter. Satisfaction. He walked back to his car. As he opened the door, he caught his reflection in the window. He looked tired. The undercover op had been grueling. The stress of the trial, the media circus, the political fallout, it had taken a toll. But looking at the courthouse now, hearing the jazz music, seeing the open doors, it was worth every second. He got in the car and started the engine. He punched home into the GPS. The display showed a long drive to D.C. He had a briefing on Monday morning. A new case, rumors of a governor in the Midwest taking bribes from pharmaceutical companies, another spider spinning another web. Ronan put the car in drive. He took one last look at the courthouse in the rearview mirror. "Your turn, Governor," he whispered to the empty car. He pulled out onto the main road, merging into traffic. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the road. But behind him, the courthouse was bathed in the warm golden light of the late afternoon. It no longer looked like an icebox. It looked, finally, like a hall of justice. The hunter moved on, but the kingdom he had liberated was safe. And for Ronan Hale, that was the only paycheck that mattered. And that is how the hunter became the hunted. Judge Langford thought she could bully Ronan Hale because of the color of his skin, never realizing that he held the power to strip her of everything she held dear. She is now serving a life sentence behind the very bars she used to enslave others. This story is a reminder that no one is above the law, and true power lies not in a title, but in integrity. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate karma and justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who needs to see a bully get what they deserve. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss a new story. We have more tales of revenge and redemption coming next week. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.